Muse Tales welcomes you. Enjoy this video and subscribe to Muse Tales. Support matters. With 90% of our viewers yet to subscribe, we need your help to keep creating engaging content. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell. Let us know where you're watching from. Leave your city in the comments below. The night my world fell apart began just like any other. It was a Wednesday, ordinary, predictable until it wasn't. I had come home earlier than usual, expecting nothing more than the usual evening routine with my wife, Junior. But as I stepped inside, something felt off. I could hear her voice upstairs, slightly muffled, but clear enough to make out the warmth in her tone. "Yeah, babe, today was incredible. I loved every second of it." I froze mid-step. My pulse quickened. Junior never talked like that about work. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. Instinct told me to walk away, pretend I hadn't heard anything. But something stronger, an unshakable suspicion, kept my feet rooted in place. I edged closer, peering inside just as she turned away from the mirror. She was mid-change, her phone still pressed to her ear, her skirt slipping off to reveal black lace underwear, lingerie I had never seen before. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay silent. "Okay, I should go," she murmured. "He'll be home soon. Talk tomorrow, handsome." Handsome. The call ended, and she slipped off her blouse, standing in nothing but that matching lace set. My mind raced, searching for some logical explanation. But then she turned to the mirror again, and my breath caught in my throat. A bruise, a small dark mark on her left side, one I hadn't put there. Junior gasped softly, her fingers brushing over the mark. "Damn," she muttered under her breath. "I have to cover this up." My stomach twisted. I backed away from the door, my thoughts a chaotic mess. Was I imagining things, jumping to conclusions? The evidence was right there, plain as day. For 20 years, I had believed in our marriage, trusted her without question. Had it all been a lie? I needed proof. I forced myself to move, to think clearly. If I confronted her now, she'd deny everything. I needed evidence, undeniable proof of her betrayal. With steady hands, I grabbed her phone from the nightstand. The screen was locked. My heart pounded. We had never used passcodes before. That was the second red flag. I set the phone down carefully and scanned the room. Her blouse lay crumpled on the bed. I picked it up, inhaling deeply. Shaving cream, but not mine. A deep sense of dread settled in my chest. I rushed downstairs, grabbed a small DVR camera from the garage and returned to the bedroom. I hid the tiny device behind a row of my ties in the closet, perfectly angled to capture everything that happened in the room. Then I turned to her laptop, another password. I had never felt more like a stranger in my own home. With no other options, I grabbed my keys and left. My hands were shaking as I called Junior. "Hey babe," I said, keeping my voice even. "Work's a mess. I'll grab dinner on my way home." She hesitated before answering. "Oh, okay, be safe." I could hear the relief in her voice. She thought she had time, but I was already 10 steps ahead. I ended up at a quiet dive bar across town, the kind of place where no one asked questions, where you could sit with your thoughts and a stiff drink. A woman behind the counter smiled as she approached. "First time here," I nodded. "Rough day." I let out a hollow chuckle. "Something like that." She slid a gin and tonic across the bar. "Well, here's to better ones ahead." I barely tasted the drink. My mind was elsewhere. Back at home, replaying Junior's words, that damn bruise. By the time I got home, it was past 11. The house was dark. I crept into bed, my mind racing. Junior stirred beside me. "You're late," she murmured sleepily. "Yeah," I replied. "Long day." She sighed, shifting closer. "I've been missing you lately." I tensed as her fingers trailed over my arm. Maybe once I would have believed her. But now I had no idea who I was lying next to. "Too tired," I whispered, turning away. She hesitated, then rolled over. "Maybe in a couple of days?" I said nothing. As soon as she drifted off, I slipped out of bed and retrieved the DVR. My hands trembled as I plugged it into my laptop. The screen flickered to life. I watched as Junior stepped out of the shower, her fingers ghosting over the bruise again. Her expression wasn't just one of concern. It was frustration, guilt. Then she did something odd. She reached into her dresser and pulled out flannel pajamas. The thickest pair she owned. Junior always slept in shorts or nothing at all. Was she covering the bruise or was she covering herself? I shut the laptop, my heart pounding. Tomorrow I would find out. The next morning I left early. I called in late to work and drove straight to my friend, Luke. He had been through this before. His ex-wife had cheated and he had caught her the same way I planned to catch Junior. "Damn man," Luke muttered when I told him. "You sure?" I nodded. "I need proof." He exhaled heavily. "I got you." He handed me a set of small audio recorders, the same ones he had used in his own egg. Investigation. Plant them around the house. One in her car. If she's hiding something, these will catch it. By the time I got home, I had a plan. I slipped the first recorder under the couch, another in our bedroom near the nightstand. The third went inside the air vent in the hallway, subtle but close enough to catch anything suspicious. The last one I saved for her car. That night, I faked a late work call and excused myself. As soon as she was asleep, I crept outside and slipped the final recorder beneath her driver's seat. I went to bed exhausted but determined. Tomorrow I'd start listening. Tomorrow I'd find out the truth. Mary's confession caught me off guard. I hadn't expected this turn in the conversation. She exhaled deeply, her fingers tightening around George's hand. "I was young and desperate," she continued, "made mistakes I'm not proud of. But George, he saw something in me that no one else did. Instead of just throwing me away, he gave me a choice, to let my past define me or to fight for something better. I chose to fight." I watched as George squeezed her hand reassuringly. "That's why I owe him everything," she finished, her voice steady now. I respected her honesty, but my mind was elsewhere. Every second that passed reminded me why I was really here. The betrayal, the lies, the fact that my wife was slipping away behind my back. George must have sensed it because he cleared his throat and said, "Let's get back to it, Dave." I nodded, shaking off the moment of sentimentality. "Right?" We paid for lunch and left the bar, my mind already racing with our next move. Back at the motel, we finalized the surveillance setup. Tiny cameras discreetly hidden, microphones set to pick up every sound. If Marge and Perez met here again, I'd have everything I needed. "Now we wait," George said, checking the receiver. But waiting wasn't my strong suit. While George packed up, I pulled out my phone and did another deep dive into Will Perez. This time, I went beyond the surface: social media, property records, past employers. And that's when something new caught my attention. A divorce filing from 8 months ago. Marge had said he was married, that he was stuck in a loveless relationship. But according to court documents, he wasn't married anymore. Had she lied? Or had Perez lied to her? "George," I said, showing him my screen. "Look at this." He frowned. "So he's been single this whole time?" "Looks like it." George exhaled sharply. "This changes things. If your wife thinks he's still married, he's manipulating her. If she knows he's single, well, then she's the one lying to you." Neither answer made me feel any better. That night, I returned home as if nothing had changed. But inside, I was burning with questions. Marge greeted me at the door, her smile bright, her eyes warm, completely unbothered. "Hey, handsome," she said, pressing a kiss to my cheek. "Dinner's almost ready." "Smells good," I replied, forcing a casual tone. Tom and Julia were in the living room, half watching a show while scrolling through their phones. Everything seemed so normal, but I knew better. I played along, making small talk, eating the meal she had cooked. But every laugh, every glance, every moment felt tainted. That night, as she curled up beside me in bed, I fought the urge to pull away. Instead, I whispered, "I love you, Marge." She stilled for half a second. Then she whispered back, "I love you too, James." A lie. I knew it now. Knew it in the way she hesitated. Knew it in the way she had to think about it. The next morning, she left the house early. Said she was meeting some friends for brunch. I wasn't buying it. George and I were parked down the street before she even pulled out of the driveway. Here we go, George muttered, eyes locked on her car. We followed from a safe distance, keeping out of sight. 15 minutes later, she pulled into the parking lot of a small cafe. I tensed, expecting Perez to be waiting. But instead, she met up with a woman, mid-40s, well-dressed, someone I didn't recognize. They greeted each other warmly, sat at a table near the window, and started talking. I was about to write it off as nothing when George nudged me. "Check her body language," he said. "She's nervous." I looked closer. He was right. Marge kept glancing around, her fingers tapping the edge of the table. The other woman leaned in, speaking quietly, her expression serious. "What's this about?" I muttered. George pulled out his phone and zoomed in, trying to read their lips. "Give me a minute," he said. "I might be able to catch a few words." We watched as the conversation grew heated. Marge looked upset. The woman reached across the table, grabbing her hand in a pleading gesture. Then, as if dropping a bombshell, she pulled out her phone and showed Marge something. Marge's face drained of color. She snatched the phone out of the woman's hands, staring at the screen in shock. "What the hell is that?" I whispered. Marge shook her head rapidly, saying something over and over again. The woman responded firmly, as if trying to warn her. Then, without another word, she stood up and left. Marge sat there, staring blankly at the table. My heart pounded. "What just happened?" I asked George. "Don't know yet," he replied, "but I think we just stumbled onto something bigger than we expected." The breaking point when Marge got home that evening, she was different, quieter, more distant. Something about that conversation had shaken her. I pretended not to notice, acting as if my mind was on work. But I watched her carefully, waiting for her to slip up. And finally she did. Late that night, when she thought I was asleep, she crept downstairs. I followed. She pulled out her laptop and logged into her email. I peeked from the hallway, my heart hammering. Then, just as she started typing, her phone rang. She answered on the first ring. "What do you want?" she whispered. A pause. "No, I'm not backing out. I just need to think." Another pause. "Okay, Wednesday. But this is the last time." She hung up and deleted the call log. I barely made it back upstairs before she did. My pulse raced as I lay there, pretending to sleep. Wednesday. That was the day she planned to meet him again. And this time I'd be waiting. Wednesday arrived and I felt like a man standing at the edge of a cliff. I had spent the last 2 days watching Marge closely, but she had given nothing away. Whatever the woman at the cafe had told her had shaken her, yet she carried on as if everything was normal. But I knew better. I had proof now. I had dates, locations, call logs, and footage. But what I still didn't have was the full truth. That's what today was about. George and I were already set up at the motel before Marge even left the house. The surveillance cameras were active, the audio devices ready. "Are you sure you can handle this?" George asked as I sat tensely in front of the monitor. I clenched my fists. I need to see it with my own eyes. We watched as Marge's car pulled into the parking lot. My stomach twisted as I saw Will Perez already waiting. He didn't even hesitate. The moment she stepped out of the car, he pulled her into a tight embrace. I gritted my teeth. They exchanged a few words before heading inside. This was it. I turned up the audio feed and listened. The room was small but well-furnished. Marge sat at the edge of the bed while Perez paced the floor, his expression unreadable. "You've been acting strange," he said. "What did she tell you?" Marge ran a hand through her hair, sighing heavily. She told me you're not married." Silence. "You lied to me, Will." Perez exhaled, shaking his head. "I didn't lie. I just didn't correct you." Marge let out a bitter laugh. "That's the same thing." He sat beside her, reaching for her hands. "Listen, I didn't want to lose you. You kept saying this was temporary, that you'd never leave James. If I had told you I was single, would you have taken me seriously?" Marge pulled away. Her expression conflicted. "I don't know. I could barely breathe." She admitted it. Perez softened his voice. "I love you, Marge. You know that. And if you're honest with yourself, you love me too." She closed her eyes. "Will, please. You can't keep pretending. If you weren't happy with James, you wouldn't be here right now." I clenched my fists, my entire body shaking. Marge took a deep breath. "This has to stop." Perez stiffened. "What?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I can't do this anymore, Will. It was a mistake. All of it." I was so stunned I almost missed Perez's reaction. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkening. "A mistake?" His voice was dangerously low. Marge nodded. "I love my husband. I got caught up in something I shouldn't have. But I can't keep hurting him." Perez let out a humorless chuckle. "So what? You're just gonna walk away?" She stood up. "Yes." He shot up after her. "I don't believe you." Marge's voice trembled. "Will, don't make this harder than it already is. Perez grabbed her wrist, his expression unreadable. I gave up everything for you, Marge. You don't get to just leave. That's when George muttered, "That's enough," and started toward the door. But I grabbed his arm. No, I said through gritted teeth. Not yet. Perez tightened his grip on Marge's wrist. You were supposed to be different. Will, let go. You said you loved me. Marge's voice cracked. I thought I did, but I was wrong. Perez let out a slow, humorless laugh. Wow, you really are just like everyone else. Marge yanked her arm free. Goodbye, Will? She turned to leave, and that's when he snapped. You're making a mistake, he said darkly. You walk out that door, and I promise you, you'll regret it. Marge froze. Are you threatening me? Perez took a slow step forward. I'm just saying, think carefully about what you do next. That's when I made my decision. I pushed open the door. Marge gasped as her eyes locked onto mine. James? Perez's face twisted in shock. I stepped inside, my pulse thundering in my ears. You have something to say to my wife? I asked coldly. Perez lifted his chin. This isn't your business. I took another step forward. That's where you're wrong. Marge was already crying. James, I cut her off with a look. Not now. She swallowed hard, nodding. Perez scoffed. So what, you came here to fight for her? I didn't answer. Instead, I turned to Marge. Let's go. She hesitated for only a moment before stepping toward me. Perez laughed bitterly. You're really choosing him over me? Marge wiped her tears. I never should have chosen you at all. His expression darkened, but he didn't stop her as she walked past him. I followed her out, but before leaving, I turned back to him. You ever come near my wife again? I said in a low, lethal tone. And you'll regret it. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Then, without another word, I shut the door behind me. The ride home was silent. Marge stared out the window, wiping at her tears every now and then. When we pulled into the driveway, she turned to me. Are you gonna leave me? I gripped the wheel tightly. I don't know. She let out a shaky breath. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, I said quietly. She nodded, fresh tears falling. I'll do anything to fix this. Anything. I turned to face her, my chest tight with pain. I just need time, I said. Finally, she nodded. Okay. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then, without another word, we stepped inside our house. But I knew that no matter what happened next, things would never be the same again. The silence in our house was deafening. After discovering the truth, after seeing Marge in that motel room, after hearing her say she thought she loved him, I couldn't just go back to how things were. I slept in the guest room. Marge tried to give me space, but I could see the pain in her eyes every time I avoided her. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I just didn't know how to move forward. I had spent years believing in us, believing in the vows we made, believing that we were a team. Now, that foundation had been cracked. And the worst part? I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. 3 days after the confrontation, Marge knocked softly on the guest room door. James, can we talk? I hesitated before opening it. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her face pale. She stepped inside, wringing her hands. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve this conversation. But I need to say this. I stayed silent. She took a shaky breath. I messed up. I betrayed you. And I hate myself for it. There is no excuse for what I did. No justification. It was selfish, reckless, and cruel. I clenched my jaw. Marge's voice cracked. But I swear to you, James, I never stopped loving you. I lost myself. I convinced myself I was missing something. But the truth is, I had everything I ever needed right here. I was too blind to see it. I stared at her. My emotions tangled. If you really loved me, Marge, then why did you do it? Tears spilled down her cheeks. Because I was weak. Because I was looking for something outside of myself when the problem was always me. She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. I ended it. I told him I wanted nothing more to do with him. And if you give me the chance, I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that I only want you. I looked at the woman I had spent years loving. The woman who had broken me in ways I never thought possible. Do you really think we can come back from this? I asked quietly. She swallowed hard. I don't know. But I'm willing to try. That night, I sat alone in the living room, staring at an old wedding photo of us. I thought about all the good years, all the bad ones. I thought about the moments of laughter, the moments of struggle. I thought about the woman I fell in love with. The woman who, despite her betrayal, was now begging me to stay. I had two choices. Walk away and start over. Stay and try to rebuild. Both roads were painful. Both had no guarantees. But in the end, I knew my answer. The next morning, Marge found me in the kitchen, making coffee. She hesitated in the doorway. James, I'm not leaving. I interrupted. Her lips parted in shock. You're not? I sighed. I don't know if I can forgive you today. Maybe not even next week. But I'm willing to try. Her face crumpled and fresh tears streamed down her cheeks. Thank you, she whispered. I didn't reply. I just hoped we could find our way back. Because no matter how broken we were, I wasn't ready to let go. If you enjoyed the story, please give us a thumbs up. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe to Muse Tales for more emotional stories.